So if you wouldn't mind moving to these reserved seats, you'll preserve your eyesight for a little while longer. Our final panelist, Tim Weiskel, graduated magna cum laude from Yale University. He trained as a social anthropologist and historian, as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris. Apologies for my horrible French. Following field work in West Africa, he received his D.Phil from Oxford University and returned to the United States to teach anthropology and history at Williams College in Yale, and currently teaches at Harvard's Extension School. His research concentrates upon belief systems within cultures and how core cultural beliefs can either facilitate or block change over time. In particular, he has examined how dominant belief systems serve to impede or enable different cultures to perceive the changing environmental challenges that confront us all as a human family. He has also helped to found the Cambridge Climate Research Associates, which consults with organizations to create on-site and online training programs for institutions, universities, corporations, municipalities, and national governments. The goal is to assist these organizations in analyzing the climate impact of global carbon consumption and help them envision the necessary transformations we must all now undertake to enable the human community to move to a post-carbon fueled world. Please join me in welcoming Tim Weiskel.
Well, one of the advantages of coming last is that everything good has been said, and all I have to do is underscore it in a sense. And I'll do it, if I can get this thing operating, with a few illustrations. It should be said that I'm a techno-peasant, and that's giving peasantry a bad name. This is the old dog, new tricks category. I'm not really that good at it, and I'm learning from my students each year. But we shouldn't, in a sense, blame them for my inadequacies. They can all, as can my nephews and nieces, instruct me, and usually do on each occasion, family gathering and the like. And I gather most of this stuff is being tweeted nowadays and has various other kinds of vocabulary associated with it. I don't like to tweet. I don't like the limit of whatever it is, like 147 words or something like that, or characters. And it'll be interesting to see if I can get any of it to work. But if I can, I want to underscore a couple things, and until it comes up, we'll see. First, thanks to the Divinity School for holding this, which I don't think is widely discussed around the campus in general. So you guys are in the forefront in some respects, but also you've been in the forefront for a long time, and that's the thanks I want to extend as well. I came here 25 years ago on a fellowship to the Divinity School from the Luce Foundation to study environmental ethics. Now, there's been a bit of a hiatus, and I suppose one of the things to do would be to explain what happened in the intervening 25 years, but that would be too boring for words and probably not very instructive on where we need to go from here. So I won't indulge in that, except by way of thanking a few key individuals, and people like Roy know they should be included from the outset, for having kept alive, in a sense, the tradition of what we're discussing today, even during a period of relative lapse. What I wanted to emphasize, though, too, was that I came to the Divinity School with, in effect, a very different sense of what religion was about. I was trained as an anthropologist and historian, and we approach religions in a very different way than divines do, as I found out very quickly in the first few months of being here. We look at what religions are. That is to say, religions are what religions do, and people's religions are what they believe in religiously. What they believe in is what they do on automatic. Your beliefs are not what you think. Those are thoughts. Your beliefs are what you do when you don't know what you're doing. What guides your behavior when you don't know what you're doing is what you believe in. If you believe in it religiously, it's a religious belief. How do you know whether you believe in it religiously? very simply. A religious belief is that kind of belief that you're more willing to defend than examine. So it's a question of habits, culturally learned, which you will defend. That is the realm of religion. For that reason, I'm going to argue very briefly here today that religion is our last best chance for sustainability. It's also our biggest remaining obstacle, because our habits of thought, mind and heart, have to change radically from what they've been in the past in a very short period of time. Now, this is what I actually teach, and you can probably get access to it on the web, since I teach all my courses now on the web, and you can see what's involved. We do this through the Extension School, and when you get connected on the web, you can get some of this stuff pretty interestingly in a way. It's all made available now through everything, like YouTube, which comes up every once in a while with interesting material. What I argue is that because we now realize that we are alive with millions of other species on the only blue, life-supporting planet in the known universe, we are in need of a new human ethic of sustainability. We must now learn, as cosmic citizens, to embrace the full range of humanity in all its unfamiliar forms, struggle together toward a common goal of global sustainability, and cherish and celebrate that time that now remains for the human moment in Earth's self-renewing and ever-changing web of life. I tell my students early on that it's your task in this course, this is the course on the ethics of sustainability, and well beyond it, to find your voice, join the chorus, and sing your heart out with all the passion and commitment you can muster. Sing as if your life depended upon it, because in fact, it does. The reasons I came to this insight are not particularly from organized religion. In fact, you'll find that I have some problems with organized religion. I'll go over these a little bit at length in the future, but why don't I get to my conclusions first, since I might not get to them if I ramble on. First, fatal religious beliefs are Abramic exceptionalism, whether it's the chosen people or those who feel they're chosen by covenantal confessionalism, or those who feel that, in the words of the tradition of Islam, there's one God and Muhammad is his prophet. All of these three Muhammad-oriented traditions tracing their, in effect, lineage to Abram, who becomes Abraham, and then either entitles people who are chosen for their confessions or their covenants. I think this is the biggest contemporary crisis we have, underscored by others, especially Diane just recently. This notion of liberal economies is installed and inscribed in us in the belief in growthism, that growth is always and everywhere good. Growth uber alles, as it is often phrased, is the, in effect, justification for... We had a president who was a classmate of mine as a Rhodes Scholar, in fact, who spent his time saying, it's the economy, stupid. Well, Bill, it isn't the economy. The economy is a subset of something else, and if you don't learn how to live in the rules of that something else, your economy is not going to be much good. The latest apostle of this apostasy is Danny Yergin. You can hear him on Wednesday. He'll be teaching in the Science Center at 5 o'clock. He gives a 2-hour lecture as part of the environment program, of all things. The third and I think, most insidious form of religious belief that we're all subscribing to is techno-scientific salvationists. Thanks to science, we'll think of something, or usually they'll think of something, right? Some technological rabbit will be pulled out of some technological hat, and things will be okay. Now, the combination of all three of those things, Abramic exceptionalism, we're not like the great unwashed. We're different, right? Growthism, that all we have to do is sort of focus on more, bigger, better logic. And technoscience, thanks to science, we can avoid the problems of constraint in an ecosystem. Those can combine very powerfully together, in effect, to be our biggest religious problem. And the reason for this is that while we may be architects of our own fate, we're not working under conditions of our own choosing. This is just a representation graphically of what happened since the beginning of 1900 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to the present. And guess what? We're just beyond the year 2000 with the convergence of a peaking oil supply, growing population, and planetary temperatures going beyond all expectation. And in fact, usually confounding the measurement systems we've got in place. So there are four simple truths we've got to learn very quickly. There are going to be some major historical discontinuities that we will encounter in the near future. Perhaps not in my lifetime, but certainly in the lifetime of most of the students in the room and anybody that would be my nieces, nephews, or children's age. Currently, we're not being told about these discontinuities, not because there's a conspiracy of silence, but because most of those in the charge of educational institutions, political institutions, don't realize it. They are equally ignorant about this. Our ignorance, however, will be no excuse. We're going to be whacked by these discontinuities anyway. There will be no escaping these potentially catastrophic discontinuities. Finally, we will need to learn to think clearly and act deliberately in order to survive, not just to do well, but in order to survive. This isn't a question about economic system or like, but as a species. Now, what's a discontinuity? This is a kind of discontinuity. What obtained during this phase of growth of what this represents population is not obtaining during this. What obtained during this period and its decline in carrying capacity is not obtaining there. There's a discontinuity in three different phases here. One where carrying capacity is widely separated from a species, a specific presence, and then as they two approach each other, they stabilize, but a more probable discontinuity, one that is repeated as a kind of drumbeat in human history. Not the exception, the rule is one of overshoot and collapse, overshoot and collapse, overshoot and collapse. If you doubt this, start rereading your Bible, which is not a book. It's a library of books. It's a library of books about overshoot and collapse. Now, the people who make this clear to us are those from the prophetic tradition, people like William Sloane Coffin at Yale, who very clearly, more than 40 years ago, had a strong injunction.
As I see it, the primary religious task these days is to try to think straight. Seeing clearly is more important even than good behavior. For redemptive action is born of vision. Religious faith, far from being a substitute for thought, makes better thinking possible. You can't think straight with a heart full of fear, for fear seeks safety, not the truth.
Now think about that in reference to what we're thinking publicly. We've got a politics based on fear, but you can't think straight with a heart full of fear, right? Because what we look for is safety, not truth. Now, if you're looking for truth and not safety, you come up with a very different approach to things.
If your heart's a stone, you can't have decent thoughts either about personal relations or about international ones.
Now, this may help us understand a bit about people who've just had heart transplants We don't know much about their new hearts, but in any case, they can't have decent thoughts about personal or international relations if they are driven by fear.
A heart full of love, on the other hand, has a limbering effect on the mind. And Christians should never, never think they honor the greater truth they find in Christ by ignoring truths found elsewhere.
Okay. The many thanks I owe to people here start with the towering figures like George Williams, who in effect was the Hollis Professor of Divinity and for a long time drew the attention of the public to the tension between the wilderness and paradise themes within the religious tradition. People like Ted Hebert, who taught here when I was first here 25 years ago, and drew attention now in paperback to the Yahwist landscape, rereading that whole tradition, which some people abuse. People like Gordon Kaufman, who in effect reconstructed theology on a whole different basis. If taken seriously, we wouldn't have half the problems we do. And of course, not just famous men, but famous women. Mary Evelyn Tucker put together, 11 volumes, I think it is now. She edited this one on Buddhism, but several of the others with her husband as well, John Grimm. And this was an extraordinary, still it stands, it's the biggest single collection of reflection on religions and ecology. This was all part of that tradition, as was this Harvard Seminar on Environmental Values. Started years and years ago before the internet. As soon as Al Gore invented the internet, we got on it, as it were. But we did it from the late 80s on, and we put it out in public space where you can get access to all of these old things. One of the things we looked at was air, breath of life, winds of change. And in that process, we began to look at the whole question that Bill McKibben brought to our attention when we brought him here as a fellow for a year in the Center for the Study of Values in Public Life. And it's from him that we learned a lot. But even before he was here, a number of us took this thing rather seriously from the Divinity School. And we went down to Washington, to the Senate, and said, listen, pay attention. Something's happening here. This was in 1988, right? We're dealing with 22 years ago here, and it was recorded by C-SPAN. Take a look at it. I mean, some of us got really heated at the time. It weren't really understood why a theologian, or I wasn't a theologian, I was an anthropologist from a divinity school talking to the Senate, right? Chair of the committee at the time said, I don't think we've ever had an anthropologist talk to the Senate. I said, well, want to take a look at it. They wrote it up in hearings, but I wrote it up as a book because they said, we haven't seen this before. Can you provide us with a little documentation? And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I can. So I wrote the book to do it. It's a huge annotated bibliography for them. To look at what? Well, pattern, trend, and prospect of human intervention in the ecosystem. Now, you have a tradition that can start as of this morning. At least this is when I picked it up in the Gazette. You've got a new dean who can take forward this tradition out. He knows a great deal about missionary presence and the like. So even if on the Harvard campus, questions of sustainability have moved off to the extension school, where we now actually give a degree in it, you can get a master's degree, almost totally online, in sustainability. And, I didn't even go through it here, but it's just by way of saying where I work now. And the person who made that possible was Mike McElroy, who stood for years as chairman of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. What a kind of perspective that is, right? And said, look, when you want to discontinue it at the Divinity School, it's much too important to get rid of from Harvard. We'll keep it over here. And he set it up as a special office within the University Committee on Environment. He then went on to do other things, including looking at the entire transition of China from the oldest structures we know and can see from space to some of the newest technologies we're involved in. He's head of the China project. And now the university committee's in the very capable hands of Dan Schrag and Professor James J. McCarthy, who you can hear again is the Agassiz Professor of Biological Oceanography. Bill Mumaw helped me a lot in learning about these things, and we two of us set up this Climate Talks project, and we've been teaching courses on things ever since: environmental ethics and land management, and introduction to environmental justice, how we should relate to one another. And then this Cambridge Climate Research Associates. But it was Bill, beyond any of the intellectuals, who put it to us. And why? Very simply because, as he said,
The issues I've chosen to discuss are among those which seem crucial to the nation's well-being and to the planet's survival. All are controversial and, for the most part, intensely political. But let no one say that for being more political, an issue is less spiritual. A fine prayer reads, "To those who have hunger, give bread. To those who have bread, give a hunger for justice."
wow, we need to ask and then answer, with all this impressive religious and intellectual support for sustainability, what are the religious obstacles we now face? As I indicated earlier in just listing them, I think there are three major ones, and primary among them is this.
Myth of global warming. That statement alone will provoke 500 letters to the editor by the tree huggers and the liberals and everybody who gets upset at any challenge to the alarmism and the hysteria that's going on because of the claim that man-made global warming will bring an end to spring and summer and fall and winter, and the sea will rise to horrific levels, and the heat will melt Antarctica and the North Pole, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we will find ourselves in a global tsunami.
Well, you can get access to this off our web pages. You should note that he then, from the Thomas Road Baptist Church, offered free copies of a very interesting document. Basically, a set of speeches made available, still online, on a government website that, in effect, promotes the perspective of Inhofe, who's just recently, last month, published this book on the great hoax that climate change, alarmism, represents. Santorum has taken this to new levels. Growthism is our other big problem. You can see this, as I say, on Wednesday at 5 o'clock, but you'll see it on your TVs more recently.
In your book, you debunk the theory of peak oil and argue that the world is not running out of fossil fuels. Why not? What's your theory?
We're not running out of oil anytime soon. Ever since oil started as a commercial industry in western Pennsylvania in 1859, there have been recurrent fears and scares that we're running out of oil and this time it's over. But every time we see new technologies applied, new areas open up, and we've seen that today with the growth in U.S. Domestic oil production.
Okay, no real problem here, no real problem of constraints. The thing he doesn't ask, because he's looking at this narrow period, he calls it a plateau, not a peak. If you look at a longer frame of reference, Jürgen's plateau is right on top of a pretty major peak, in the sense that all of Western civilization, as we've come to know it, which has tripled in my lifetime from 1946 to the present, the world's population has tripled. That did not happen in a generation before. It will not happen in the generation next. We cannot triple yet again. And further, Danny forgets something here. Suppose you've got access to carbon. What happens to it when you use it? It doesn't go away. There's no way in an ecosystem. You can oxidize it, but it becomes atmospheric. At that point, you change something really extraordinary. It's a major intellectual form of heresy to proceed as if you can ignore these things now, and he does. And so, as the cartoonist put it, while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunity for profit. This is exactly what he's saying to Obama, and it's what Obama's listening to. The problem is that we're in real trouble because too many people believe this to be the case.
My personal opinion is that we have to keep geoengineering on the table. We have to look at it very carefully because we might get desperate enough to want to use it. The danger, of course, with geoengineering is the one I was referring to a moment ago. We don't understand the system well enough to predict its responses in detail, and that means there's always a danger if you try to engineer the system on a large scale that you will do something that has side effects that are worse than the dimension of the problem you're trying to cure.
Okay, now this man's not insignificant. He's Obama's science advisor. He also holds 2 chairs here, the Heinz Professorship over at the Kennedy School, and he's a professor of Earth and Planetary Sciences, talking to Obama, among other things, about altering the Earth's climate by sending up mirrors, sending up sulfur dioxide to shield us from incoming sun. This is geoengineering on a scale gone mad, right? But there is this fundamental belief, sort of based in the arrogance of humanism, that the Earth is there for us to tinker with, right? We've been given dominion over it. You combine this techno-scientific arrogance with the sense of chosenness and exceptionalism that comes out of our traditional religious tradition, you can see we're in trouble here. We're in the grips of worldviews derived from the Abramic cultures of the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, in the Palestinian Hill Country. These cultural assumptions need to be re-examined, and we need to move beyond the exceptionalism inherent in anthropocentrism. Why? Because here's where we are, and here's what's happening on a scale we can't really cope with. This is where we're going to have to go. The growth rate is going to have to come down like that to near zero for this to become stable, sustainable. Now, Thomas Berry, a fellow here when we had this going 25 years ago, made this very clear. We have to choose either to go forward with what he called the technozoic or the ecozoic. And we're in that choice at this point. We're in the choice because there's no opting out. At this point, we've seen it. And we can now see what its implications are going to be. This is the way scientists map what's happening annually to us. You can follow the calendar, 81, 82, 83. These are the trends. And it's why we need to move on all fronts. Because the last best chance we've got is to figure out how to subordinate our understanding of ourselves within a sustainable ecosystem. We're expendable. It's not. Thank you very much.